And now we are going to get going with our very first presentation of the weekend. So we have Stacy Pursell, who is the founder and CEO of the Recruiter. She will be talking tonight about recruiting and retention, the twin challenges of the veterinary profession. Stacy is an internationally respected executive search consultant and recruiter based in the United States and ranked in the top 1% of search consultants worldwide. Considered the go-to expert in the animal health industry and veterinary profession for talent-centric solutions. Stacy's workforce expert, certified personnel consultant, and certified employee retention specialist. Stacy's the founder and CEO of the Vet Recruiter, an executive search and recruiting firm serving animal health industry and veterinary profession. Stacy has 25 plus years of executive search and recruiting experience in the animal health industry and veterinary profession and has placed more professionals in positions in the animal health industry and veterinary profession in the United States than any other recruiter. She was the first recruiter to focus exclusively on animal health and veterinary medicine. All right, Stacy, I'm going to turn the slides over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Stacy, for inviting me here, and also for the United Spay Alliance. So who am I and why am I here? Well, Stacy, thank you for that very kind introduction. My journey started back when I was in college attending Oklahoma State University, and I was a journalism student writing for the school newspaper. And OSU was hiring a new president for the school, and the editor of the newspaper sent me to interview the head of the search committee about the process for OSU to find a new president. And what I learned that day fascinated me and set the course for my career and my journey in executive search. So tonight I get to be here with you and talk about two things that I'm most passionate about, and that's the veterinary profession and then recruiting, hiring, and then also retention. So I'd like to begin tonight's presentation by addressing the fact that all recruiting and retention efforts in the veterinary profession start with the current shortage of veterinarians. And that's because the shortage is making it more difficult to hire veterinarians, and it's also making it more difficult to retain them. And that applies to other veterinary positions as well, not just veterinarians. So although I'll be talking a lot about veterinarians, this can also apply to hiring other staff members and team members as well. So there are two main reasons why the shortage is making it more difficult to hire and retain veterinarians. So when I recently checked, there were about 4,500 open jobs for just veterinarians on the AVMA job board alone. And we know that not every single veterinarian job opening is posted on the AVMA site. So we know that there are at least 4,500, but probably as many as 5,000 or even more than 5,000 open veterinarian positions in the job market. And according to projections that I'll talk about here shortly, that number is expected to increase in the coming years. And second, stress and burnout are major problems within the veterinary profession. If there is a shortage of veterinarians, which I believe that there is, it means that employers are trying to do more with less, which means that existing veterinarians and staff are often overworked and under stress. And so I'd like to address the veterinarian shortage more in depth. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or the BLS, veterinarian jobs, and they just updated this last month in September. So veterinarian jobs are projected to grow by 20% between 2022 and 2032. So we're already a year into this decade because it's 2023. So keep in mind that these are veterinarian jobs, technician and assistant jobs, and other jobs within the profession are not included in these numbers. So the BLS is projecting 5,000 job openings for veterinarians each year on average over the decade, with approximately 1,800 of those representing brand new positions. So if the veterinary profession is adding nearly 1,800 brand new positions every year, you can see how the veterinarian shortage is going to get worse over time unless there is some kind of a black swan or unusual event that we're not expecting. So you might be wondering if there are enough veterinarian graduates entering the workforce to keep up with the retirements. And according to the latest numbers from the AVMA, there are approximately 124,000 veterinarians in the U.S. and about 78,000 little bit more than 78,000 are working in clinical practice. And then in a 2022 article, Today's Veterinary Business stated that approximately 2,000 people retire from the veterinary profession every year, and that's veterinarians. And according to data from the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges, about 3,000 veterinary students graduated in 2020. So yes, in fact, new graduates are keeping up with retirements. There are about 1,000 more veterinary graduates entering the workforce as there are retirements. But the bad news is that they are not keeping up enough to help combat the shortage of veterinarians. And the reason why is because the profession has been growing in recent years. And then according to the BLS numbers, it's projected to grow even more in the future. So the big question is, how severe will the shortage be? And it seems as though it becomes greater with each passing year. So what does the future look like? Well, according to the latest report by Mars Veterinary Health, which was just released, up to 55,000 new veterinarians will be needed to meet projected demand by the year 2030. And at the current rate at which the graduates are entering the workforce, which I mentioned is 3,000 per year, this means there could be as many as 24,000 open jobs for veterinarians by the end of the decade. So now that brings us to our first polling question. So in this job market, what is the minimum salary that you think that I have seen a veterinarian accept during the past 2 years, including new graduates and those that are still in veterinary school?
All right, I have launched the poll, so you can go ahead and click in your screen, everyone. Is it 80,000, 90,000, 100,000, or 110? Give you a few more seconds. All right, I'm going to close the poll out here to get those votes in. All right, I'm going to go ahead and let's close that and let's share the results. So the poll results are 43% of attendees think it's 80,000, and then 28% think it is 90,000. 20% said 100,000, and then 9% said 110,000.
Okay, well, the answer is C. It's 100,000, and I'll provide more information about that in just a few minutes. So thank you, everybody, for taking this poll. So the law of supply and demand has dictated that the cost of hiring and retaining veterinarians has increased, and it's done so dramatically during the past 12 to 18 months, and really in the recent 3 to 4 years, but especially in the last 18 months or so. So according to salary.com, the average salary for a veterinarian as of September 25th is $105,840. And we haven't seen in our firm any offers to veterinarians being accepted that are below $100,000 in base salary for a full-time veterinarian over the past 2 years. And this applies to new graduates. So graduates in veterinary students that are still in school are asking for and receiving starting salaries in the range of $100,000 to $150,000 right out of school. In fact, students are receiving offers in this range before they even graduate, and many are receiving multiple offers prior to commencement. And we've even seen situations where new graduates will accept an offer and companies will start paying them before they've even started the position, which is something that I've never seen before except for in the last 18 months or so. So experienced veterinarians are receiving even more in terms of starting salary. So we're seeing veterinarians with 3 or more years of experience that are asking for and receiving salaries of $140,000, and then those in clinical practice, many of them are also getting production. And so we're seeing some ER veterinarians that are asking for salaries between $200,000 and $250,000 before they'll consider making a job change, and they'll say that they can make more money doing relief work. So to take a full-time position, it has to be worth their while. And believe it or not, we have seen salary ranges as high as $300,000 in general practice for an experienced doctor with medical director responsibilities on the East Coast, and that would be specifically in the New York City area. And we've seen offers as high as $275,000 on the West Coast in places like San Francisco. In addition, almost every job offer that we're seeing, almost every job offer includes a sign-on bonus of some kind. So these bonuses are typically in the range of 10 to 20,000, but we've seen them as high as 100,000. And we've also seen multi-year sign-on and retention bonuses as high as 250,000. So that's somebody that agrees to come on and stay for a period of, say, 3 years, and that they'll usually get a sign-on bonus up front, and then they'll get a retention bonus each year that they stay after that. And the signing bonuses is an area where hiring and retention are overlapping in this market, and that's because some employers are offering larger signing bonuses to candidates who are willing to commit to a certain number of years with the organization. And I've seen some employers that are locking in new employees in for 4 or 5 years. And so in that way, what the employer is attempting to do is accomplish both of their objectives, both the hiring and the retention of veterinarians at the same time. And this is because veterinarians are in high demand. Also, there is no job hopping stigma in the job market anymore. It's become customary for some people to leave their jobs after as short as 18 months or 2 years, and in some cases, even less time than that. In April, I was speaking at one of the veterinary schools, and the professor that invited me there to speak told me that a third of their 2022 graduates were already on their second job. And so that when I spoke in April of this year, those graduates had graduated in May of the previous year, and a third were already on their second job. Also, according to a recent LinkedIn study, candidates used to update their LinkedIn profile to open to work after 90 days on the job. But now some people are opening themselves up on LinkedIn to open to work as early as their second day on the job. And as you might guess, some people are taking advantage of the current conditions. However, they sometimes do that in ways that you might not anticipate. For example, I've heard from multiple sources, including from the professor that invited me to speak at the veterinary school in April, that there are some veterinarians, including some new graduates, who are exploring new job opportunities right now with the intent of securing the biggest sign-on bonuses possible so they can use those bonuses to pay off their student loans, and then some are doing that and leaving the profession altogether. And the main reason that they're doing so is because they say of stress. And so burnout is one of the biggest problems in the veterinary profession right now. And according to research published by the Cornell Center for Veterinary Business and Entrepreneurship a year ago, workplace burnout costs the veterinary profession $2 billion per year. And according to Merck Animal Health's third veterinarian well-being study, 30% of veterinarians reported that they were experiencing a high level of burnout. Because of the veterinarian shortage, I've also seen instances in which an employer will pay for the legal fees of a new veterinarian who is being taken to court by their previous employer because of a non-compete that they've signed. And I've personally seen this. And this is one of the things that I had never seen over the last 26 years as a recruiter in the veterinary space until recently. It's also noteworthy that the Federal Trade Commission is in the process of possibly banning non-compete clauses nationwide, which would have an effect on the veterinary profession among other professions and industries. And we'll likely hear the FTC's final decision by the spring of 2024, because they put it off until next year. If this FTC proposal becomes a law, it would apply to all non-compete agreements, meaning not only those that would have been theoretically signed in the future, but also those agreements that already exist. For an existing non-compete clause, the employer would have 180 days to provide formal written notice of rescission to both existing and former employees bound by a non-compete clause. So if non-compete agreements are banned, that means it will become even easier for people to explore opportunities and change jobs, which means that it will become more difficult for employers to retain the veterinarians and other people they have on staff. And so this is why employers have been taking these extraordinary measures to both hire and retain veterinarians. However, and I want to make sure that that everybody hears me say this, non-compete clauses are not the best way to retain people. And I'll be talking about retention and how to be an employer of choice shortly. So employers are also utilizing student loan repayment programs as a way of recruiting veterinarians, especially in rural areas. And this is a trend that has also continued in recent years, with many rural areas struggling to attract and retain veterinarians due to a lack of job opportunities, low salaries, and limited access to professional development resources. For example, the Veterinary Medicine Loan Repayment Program pays up to $25,000 a year toward qualified student loans of eligible veterinarians who work in areas designated by the federal government as having veterinary shortages. And qualifying veterinarians agree to serve in these areas for at least 3 years. And I know that there are many hiring managers and practice owners who would love to know that the veterinarians they're hiring will be there for at least 3 years. And employers are also paying for relocation packages in order to hire veterinarians who may not be in their geographic region. So like signing bonuses, these are becoming more common as employers find it difficult to close a veterinarian candidate without including some kind of relocation assistance in the offer if a move is needed. So how do we combat this, and what can we do to hire veterinarians in the midst of the shortage that we're experiencing? Well, the first thing is the proper mindset, because thought precedes action. And what you think about the hiring and recruiting process has an impact on what you do regarding it, and specifically what you do with the candidates who are a part of that process. And the problem is that if a hiring manager has any misguided notions or mistaken beliefs about the process or the candidates, then that'll have a negative effect on your hiring effort. So the question is, what is the proper mindset when it comes to hiring in this competitive market? So when I started out in executive search more than 26 years ago, and when I first got into executive search, I was placing executives at Fortune 500 companies, and I worked a lot in the consumer packaged goods space, placing executives with human food and beverage companies. And how I transitioned into the veterinary space is one of my clients had a pet food company, and they needed to hire a veterinarian for an executive high-level role. But more than 26 years ago when I started, and as I transitioned into the veterinary space, the employer-candidate dynamic was so different than it is today. And it was generally acknowledged that the onus was on the job seeker or the candidate to do nearly all of the heavy lifting during the hiring process. The candidate was the one that had to prove themselves. The candidate had to prove their worth to the hiring manager or to the hiring organization. However, in the recent years, that leverage has been shifting, and this shift has been even more pronounced within the veterinary profession because of the shortage of a number of qualified candidates. And so in many cases, the employer has needed or needs the candidate more than the candidate has needed the employer's job. And this has especially been the case with the best candidates, those that are in the top 10% of the talent pool. So the proper mindset for hiring in this competitive market is the tough reality that you need the candidate more than they need you. And I know that's not a popular mindset for employers to have, but it's one that needs to be had if we want to experience hiring success. So now that we've talked about the proper mindset, let's discuss the mindset that job seekers and candidates have recently had in this marketplace. And this is another change that's happened during the past 10 years and maybe even longer than that. So some of the younger candidates in the marketplace, and I'm talking about the millennial generation and Gen Z, they have what is called a consumer mindset. And so this means that they're used to having a multitude of options and also the power to make whatever choice they want to make. And so the rise of the internet, social media, and the digital age is the reason that the younger generations have this mindset, which has carried over from the larger economy to that of the employment marketplace. And so within the context of the job market, candidates are used to having a multitude of options when it comes to career opportunities. Last week, one of the recruiters in my firm spoke with a candidate who was a veterinarian who said that she was being recruited by 50 different veterinary employers, and she was having a hard time keeping it all straight. I don't know how she was keeping it all straight. But as I mentioned, top candidates have the leverage in the market, and since they do, that reinforces the consumer mindset that they already have. And so the bottom line is that candidates are accustomed to being wooed either by merchants that are attempting to make them customers or by employers that are trying to hire them as employees. So these changes are more pronounced for the millennial generation and Generation Z, and that's because they grew up while these changes were taking place, and as a result, the impact upon them is much greater than, say, Generation X. So with all of this in mind, I'd like to discuss your organization's hiring plans. So since top candidates still have the leverage and you still need to hire top candidates, then your hiring plan should mirror the realities of the current marketplace. And there's an acronym that fits how your plan needs to be when trying to hire the best candidates. And that acronym is FUN, which stands for flexible, urgent, and nimble. So make your hiring process fun. And I'm going to address each of these words and what they mean in terms of your organization's hiring efforts. So first of all, what does it mean for your hiring plan to be flexible? Well, this speaks to the overall hiring plan and specifically the hiring process from beginning to end. When you have an open position, you have an idea in your mind about how you would like things to go during the interviewing and hiring process. And more than likely, your idea of how you're expecting things to go may not happen in this market exactly as you had planned. So things may come up, some plans may fall through. And so it's important not to allow yourself to get frustrated or upset when the hiring process takes twists and turns that you're not anticipating. Instead, learn to move with the ebbs and flows of the process and view unexpected circumstances as an opportunity instead of as adversity. And that's one of the keys to, for some of the smaller organizations to being able to out-hire some larger organizations in the market if you can be more nimble with your process. So look at different situations and ask yourself, where do the opportunities lie? And smaller organizations can sometimes be more flexible and nimble than larger organizations that take longer to adapt. And then second, your hiring plan needs to be urgent. So in other words, you have to act with a sense of urgency. And there are two main reasons why you want to move with a sense of urgency. And the first reason is the same reason that you're attending today's presentation, because you're in competition with other employers for the top candidates in the marketplace. And then the second reason is something that I already addressed, and that's top candidates in the veterinary profession still have the leverage. And so this means that you can't take too long or drag your feet. If you've convinced a top candidate to enter your hiring process, the clock is ticking. And so you have to move quickly with a sense of urgency, or you could risk losing that candidate to another employer or simply to their current employer, because another option the candidate has is for them to just simply stay where they are now with their current employer. Also, you want to have the attitude that you're always hiring, or have the always hiring mentality. And even if you don't have an open position at the moment, you want to be proactive in your approach instead of reactive. So start looking before you need someone and be strategic. So how long should the hiring process last? Well, based upon my search consultant, based upon my experience as a search consultant, the recommended time frame is between 2 and 4 weeks. And that might sound really fast, but it isn't, and I would even say that 2 to 4 weeks might be too long in this market. And a lot can happen between 2 and 4 weeks as you're going through the hiring process. And if that process takes any longer, then you're at risk for losing the candidate. So, like I said, 2 to 4 weeks might even be too long for a process in this job market. And then finally, your hiring plan needs to be nimble. So what is the difference between being flexible and being nimble? Well, flexibility speaks to the process overall, which could last for several weeks, and then being nimble speaks to a certain point in time, which could be a few hours or even the length of a day. So the rule for being nimble during the hiring process is to do whatever needs to be done to hire the best candidate. So this could be conducting a video interview without much notice because that's when the candidate's available, or it could mean making an offer to a candidate who you've never met in person, which we started seeing a lot during COVID, and we've continued to see that. So since top candidates have the leverage, you're going to have to, hate to say this, but cater to them and interview when they want to interview. And there are two reasons why you want to strive to be nimble. And the first reason is what I just mentioned. You have to do whatever it takes to hire the best people. And then second, larger employers and organizations are less likely to be as nimble during the hiring process because of their procedures. It can take longer for them to react when things happen at the spur of the moment. And lot can happen at the spur of the moment. So if you're ready to act and react when you need to by being both flexible and nimble during the hiring process, then you stand a much better chance of hiring the people that you're trying to hire. So I would now like to address the role of employer branding in company culture and hiring. So if you don't have your employer brand figured out as an organization or company, then you reduce the chances that you'll be able to hire the people that you're trying to hire. Because if you don't know what your organization is about and why somebody would want to work there, then how do you expect a candidate to know why they would want to work there? So this is where sometimes a smaller employer can fall behind when they're competing against a larger organization. And that's because there are larger organizations that already have a well-established employer brand. So when you're going to compete against some of those organizations, your employer brand must be articulated and then also communicated to candidates, because candidates need to know what your organization is about, what it stands for, and why they would want to work there. So what is employer branding? Well, it's essentially how an employer is perceived by job seekers and candidates within the marketplace. So a job seeker is somebody who is actively looking for a position, and a candidate is somebody who was recruited. They weren't looking, but they're being recruited. And the rule of thumb is this: that everything that an organization does and does not do brands itself in one way or another. So you might have already guessed you can brand yourself in one of two ways, either in a positive fashion or a negative one. And if you're not aware of employer branding and you don't know what's involved with it, then you may not be aware of how your organization is branding itself in the marketplace. So some companies think they might have a positive brand, when in reality they may not have the brand that they think they have. And a negative employer brand can negatively affect your hiring efforts. So if candidates and then also your current employees don't know why they would work for you or why they do work at your organization and why it matters, then your employer brand won't be strong and they won't be as engaged. And this is known as the power of why, which is taken from a TED Talk by Simon Sinek, who explains that the secret ingredient to success is knowing the motivation behind actions. So instead of thinking about what you do or how you do it, focus on why you do it. So, for example, for a for-profit company, making a profit should not be their why, but it's the result. It's the result of their why. So, why do you do what you do? Or to put it another way, why does your organization exist? And if you feel like you don't have a why, think about what gets you out of bed in the morning. What are you doing for the greater good? What is your team doing for the greater good? And why does your team get out of bed in the morning to go do the work that they're doing? And this is important because the answers to these questions form your employee value proposition or your EVP. So your EVP isn't about salary, benefits, or flexible work arrangements. It's a statement that describes the culture of your organization, who you are, and what you stand for. So an example would be your why might be, we believe in the value of a lifelong relationship between a pet owner and their furry family member. And then your what could be, we treat your pets like family, and that backs up your why. And then your how could be, we offer cutting edge medicine. And then when you put it all together, you would have something like this. We believe in the value of a lifelong relationship between a pet owner and their furry family member. We promote this value by offering cutting edge medicine and treating your pet like it was one of our own. And as you probably know, online review sites of employers have become very prevalent and important during the past years. And you can use these to measure and assess your employer brand. So in addition to Glassdoor, there's also Google reviews, and then many others such as GreatPlaceToWork.com, Indeed, Comparably.com, and CareerBliss.com. And online reviews carry tremendous weight, especially with millennials and Generation Z. So as an employer, you have to identify these sites, monitor your reviews, and manage your employer brand. And I'd like to illustrate the importance of an employer branding with a case study. So a company reached out to me for help with filling a position that had been open for 6 months. And I almost don't want to share this story because there's a lot of positions that have been open for more than 6 months. But this company had been trying to fill this role on their own without success, and then they called me to ask me to help them fill it. So I reached out to a potential candidate about the role. When I spoke to him, he said, well, hasn't that position been open for 6 months? Why can't they fill it? What's wrong with it? And so the problem was his perception, and then perception is the foundation of branding. In short, he believed that there must be something wrong with the position or the employer or both, since the position had been open for 6 months. So despite the fact that he had never spoken with anybody at the organization, he had a negative perception and felt that there was some kind of an issue. And so that's why employer branding is so important, and why companies should work hard to figure out the employer brand and do what you can to combat any negative perception and negative branding. So before we move on, I have another polling question. So which of the following statements is false? So we have A, B, C, and D. So A is counter offers are not very common in the veterinary profession. B is the onboarding process begins as soon as the candidate accepts your offer. C, it's possible for candidates to start thinking about quitting as soon as they start the first day on the job. And then D is more than 40% of Gen Z workers are actively looking for a new job. So I'll give you a moment to pick your selection.
All right, I have launched that poll, so go ahead and click on your screen there. All right, couple more, get those last clicks in. I'm gonna go ahead and we're gonna close. Let's share those results. All right, so which of the following statements is false? 50% said quiet quitting is no longer a thing. 24% said that the onboarding process begins as soon as the offer is accepted. 11% said candidates may start thinking of quitting on their first day. And 16% said at least 40% of Gen Z are actively looking for a new job.
Okay, well, something happened with that poll because the question I had here was different than the one you just read. So my apologies, I don't know what happened there. But the choices I had were counteroffers are not very common. The onboarding process begins as soon as the candidate accepts the offer. It's possible for candidates to start thinking about quitting as soon as they start the first day on the job. And then more than 40% of Gen Z workers are actively looking for a new job. And so the answer is A, the counter offers are not very common in the veterinary profession. That was a statement that was false, and I'll share the reason why. So, and thank you for everyone who participated in that poll. So the next part of my presentation is going to focus on retention. So keep in mind there are different stages for retention, and I call these early stage, mid stage, and late stage retention. And the approach and steps that you take are different for each one. So although you might not have considered this before, the retention of your new employee does not begin as soon as they start work with your organization. Actually, retention begins as soon as they accept the offer of employment, because things can happen during the 2-week period between when they accept your job offer and when they officially start work. They could decide that they no longer want the job after they've already accepted it. They could receive an offer from another employer, or they could receive and accept a counter offer from their current employer. So, gone are the days, and this is not the case with everybody, but gone are the days where a candidate would accept an offer and you could count on the fact that they're going to, show up for work. Because we've seen, a number of instances where, that's not the case anymore. And then because counter offers are more prevalent, these candidates are getting, or these employees are getting counter offers from their current employer in an effort to try to entice them to stay. And then speaking of which, while counteroffers have always existed, they've never been used with as much frequency as a tool for retaining veterinarians as they are right now. And so I call this a late stage retention effort because the employee has already given their notice, so they're nearly out the door. And in short, employers are in such need for veterinarians, and many veterinarians who accept a new job offer are receiving a counteroffer because their current employer doesn't want to lose them. And then sometimes they're surprised when their employer makes them a counteroffer because they weren't expecting it or they hadn't encountered that happening before. And there are 3 stages for combating a counteroffer. The first is accurately gauge the candidate's sincerity. 2 is prepare the candidate for the possibility of a counteroffer. And 3 is to provide a superb onboarding experience, because when you're hiring somebody and they've agreed to come work for you, you don't want them to take a counteroffer and stay with their current employer. You want to keep them moving forward with you. So I'd like to address the early stage retention, and there are 4 steps involved with this retention stage. So first of all, make sure that you onboard the new employee with excellence and keep them engaged during that 2-week period, or however many weeks it is, before they officially start work. And have the members of leadership reach out to congratulate them and express their excitement. So continue to make them feel wanted, because this helps to assure them that they've made the right decision. And then in addition, set concrete expectations. During the hiring process, the candidate wanted to know where they stood in the process and what the next steps of the process were going to be. And it's the same after they hire them. They want to know where they fit within your company and where they are within the process. So be clear with them as far as what the steps are during the onboarding process, and where they go from here. So basically, they're wanting the answers to 2 questions. Where am I and where am I going? So knowing the answer to those questions gives them a sense of security, and that's how you want your new employees to feel. So I always say it's better to over communicate. Don't under communicate, and don't communicate the right amount. It's best to over communicate with them. And then the second step in early stage retention is to make sure that their experience as a new employee matches their expectations when they were a job candidate. And this is called the validation of experience. When a new employee is hired, what they expect to experience during their employment needs to match their actual experience, because if it doesn't, then they could be a flight risk. And this is one of the reasons why new employees begin thinking about leaving soon after they've been hired. They were told one thing during the hiring process, or they were expecting one thing during the hiring process, but then they experienced another once they join the organization. And so that contributes to people that leave after 6 months or less in the position. So an overriding best practice in terms of early stage retention and the validation of experience is this: if you brand yourself in a certain way to job candidates, then you must back it up with a company culture that is a full and accurate reflection of your branding efforts after you've hired them. And this confirms in your new employee's mind that they made the right decision in joining your team. If they don't get this validation immediately, then they could become a retention risk. So there are 3 main ways to ensure that your new employee experiences the validation of experience. So one is to deliver on what you sold them at the beginning during the interviewing and hiring process. Don't do what we call a bait and switch. And then 2, make sure they are being competitively compensated. And then 3, show respect, appreciation, and support. So something that I've seen in the last couple of years that I hadn't seen, well, I shouldn't say I hadn't ever seen it. I have seen it with large corporations where they will give a candidate an appreciation gift just for interviewing. So when I used to do a lot more work for Fortune 500 companies in the consumer packaged goods space, I would see HR directors, mail, or not mail out, but drop off like a gift basket at a hotel where a candidate was staying, or like a food basket or something. But now we're seeing this in the veterinary profession where somebody comes to interview and the employer is giving them some kind of a gift to thank them for interviewing. So it doesn't do any good to brand yourself well to great candidates and then have those people join your team and then have them quit shortly thereafter. And not only that, but if they do leave because your branding was inconsistent or they believe they were misled, then they'll also tell other people about those experiences, and that's how employers get a branding problem. And I have a story to illustrate this. So we placed a veterinarian with a group of practices. They had nine practices in the area. And our candidate took the position because it was in a clinic that was right by his house. But then they had somebody quit at one of the other locations. It was about an hour from his house. And so they asked him to move over to that clinic. And so he was going from a very short commute to about an hour commute. And so then after he was there for a very short time, he started to think about quitting. And so he called me and we spoke, and I spoke with our client, and they agreed to move him back to the original practice. But he felt like there was a bait and switch. And so that's an example of what a candidate would consider a bait and switch. They were expecting one thing, and then they got there and it became something different. So the third step involved in early stage retention of a new employee is maintaining consistent communication after the hire. So this is the best way to keep the new employee engaged during the early stages of their tenure. On the reality show alone, there is a term known as drop shock, and that's where contestants experience that's what contestants experience when the producers drop them in the middle of nowhere in a helicopter and then they fly off. So new employees can experience the same thing. In other words, you don't want your new employees to feel as though they've been dropped into unfamiliar territory all alone with no one to lend a helping hand. So you want to make sure that they're fully supported. And then the fourth step in early stage retention is gauging the new employee's level of engagement over time. And the time frame involved here is about within the first 4 to 6 weeks. So an employee's level of engagement is a true test of whether or not they're planning to leave. And remember that engagement can wane over time, and that's why it's critical to ensure that a new employee is thoroughly engaged at the very start of their employment. And that way, if their engagement does wane, it won't decrease to a dangerous level. It makes sense that you will want to monitor an employee who's been at the company 4 to 6 weeks more than you would someone who's been there for a couple of years. So you want to closely monitor their engagement at the beginning of the time when you first hired them. And so I've discussed early stage retention, and then I've alluded to late stage retention efforts, mainly the counteroffer. But before exploring late stage retention more fully, I'd like to address the area between the two, or the middle stage retention. So there are a couple of important reasons for this. So first, this is often the most neglected period during an employee's tenure at an organization. They get a lot of attention at the beginning of their employment, and then they get attention at the end of their employment once they're resigning. But once they've been successfully onboarded and the employer doesn't think they're a flight risk, they might not be receiving as much attention. And so the second reason this stage is so important is because it's difficult to pinpoint how long it will last. It can vary from situation to situation, person to person. So this is like trying to predict exactly when somebody is going to quit. And usually people or company officials don't know that an employee is thinking about quitting until they actually do quit. And so there are many things that you can do during the middle stage of retention. And the good news is that some of them don't cost a lot of money. And since that's the case, everyone should be doing these things. So the first thing is to show your employees that they're valued and appreciated. And the first part of this is verbal praise, both private and public, because an encouraging word or a pat on the back goes a long way, but recognizing someone in front of their peers or their coworkers is even better. And you can show how much you value them in more tangible ways, such as with a gift card or some other token of your appreciation. And then second, do what you can do to reduce their stress, because employees will take notice of your attempts to alleviate their stress so they can enjoy their jobs more and be more productive in the process. And then employees who aren't as stressed perform better, and they're less likely to look for another job. And I have an example of this from my work as a recruiter. So one of our clients had a pet owner who was trying to get his dog into their practice to be seen by the veterinarian, but the practice was booked solid for 2 weeks. So the client made a threat to the person on the phone and just said something that was really bad. And so it would cause the practice stress, and so the practice owner decided to close the hospital for the day because he noticed that this comment really upset people and the employees were under stress. So he said, let's have a wellness day, and so he paid everyone. They shut down the practice for a day. He brought in a food truck. They had food in the parking lot. Everybody brought their lawn chairs out, and that was a great way to cultivate loyalty with the employees and foster a great culture and also build a stellar employer brand. And then 3, treat your employees with respect. Employees want to feel as though they are respected in the workplace, and if they don't feel respected, then they're going to start looking for work elsewhere. And so that includes being respected by both their coworkers and also the members of management. And keep in mind that an employee will not want to stay with an organization if a coworker is disrespected, even if they are not disrespected. So disrespect should not be a part of a company culture. And then number 4, model and enforce accountability from the top down. So most employees don't mind being held accountable in the workplace. And this is especially true of those that are in the top 10% in their field. But people do mind when their colleagues or coworkers are getting away with things and they're not being held accountable for them, or if members of management are not being held accountable. So they'll view the workplace with negativity and start looking for an exit plan. And then 5, practice transparency as much as possible. So, everybody may not be able to know everything all the time. That's not practical, but people don't like to work for an organization that they believe is hiding information from them or has a hidden agenda. People don't like to be kept in the dark, and they start to form opinions of what is happening, and a lot of times those opinions are incorrect assumptions. So practice transparency as much as you can. And then number 6, offer more flexibility and other perks when you can. So one of the most sought after perks in the job market these days is working from home or remote work. And I know that in the veterinary profession, many employers, probably most employers, can't offer those perks, but especially the work from home or the remote. But that means you'll have to be more creative. So instead, offer maybe some schedule flexibility to some of your employees, or you could give them with additional paid time off since they probably can't work remote, or give them some kind of other schedule flexibility. And then 7 is to build trust, and this is the single most important key to retaining your employees is trust. And trust sometimes is hard to come by, but if you do the things that are on this list and your employees trust you, then they will become more loyal to you and less likely to quit. And then that brings us to retention strategies that do cost money. And I'm not talking about a gift card here or there. Since qualified candidates are scarce, those candidates probably cost more money. And so if you already have a superstar, then retaining that person is going to probably cost more money in this market where we look at the law of supply and demand. So the first step is to research the salary ranges for the positions within your organization and then compare those ranges to what your employees are actually earning. So you want to try to keep your employees compensated at least to the level of what the rest of the industry is paying, because if you're underpaying your employees, then they're probably going to find out. And so recently, Paychex, an HR outsourcing company, did a survey that shed light on these current trends, and they found that 44% of Generation Z workers, those born between 1997 and 2012, are actively looking for a new job. 42% of those polled feel a 10% to 15% increase in salary would entice them to stay with their current employer. And then millennials, those born between 1981 and 1996, and Gen Z workers are more motivated by flexible working hours, mental health benefits, employee wellness benefits, and child care benefits than they are by a pay increase. And so when asked about things that influence their employee loyalty, what would convince them to stay in their current job, the respondents said the following top factors. So they said a substantial pay raise, specifically a 10 to 15% increase. They said a stay or retention bonus, more paid time off, more flexible working hours, better access to health insurance. And so as you can see, the survey participants emphasize the fact that it would take a 10 to 15% increase for them to stay. And unfortunately, the standard pay increase, especially during employee review time, has hovered around 3%. And so that tells us that the standard cost of living raises may not retain people for long. And then the second item that people pointed to in this survey was a stay bonus or retention bonus. And these are less common than salary increases, but could prove to be valuable, especially with top employees who may not be willing to stay for a 3% cost of living pay increase. So with this in mind, look over your list of employees. Who are your top employees? When was the last time they received a raise, and what was the amount of that raise? Was it a standard 3% cost of living raise? If so, then they might be at risk of leaving. So the best way to keep employees is to do so proactively and give out appropriate raises. So this brings us to the late stage retention strategy. So you want to avoid having to use these because it means that the employee intends to leave your organization and may have already accepted an offer somewhere else, and they're giving you notice that they're leaving. So I mentioned before that counter offers are being used as a retention strategy more today than in the past, but it's not a strategy that I would suggest using, because when you make a counter offer to an employee, what you're doing is admitting that you've been underpaying them for the value that they've been providing to the organization. And people don't usually leave their job because of money alone. There are usually other factors involved, which means that if an employee accepts a counter offer, it doesn't mean that the other issues will be automatically resolved. The counter offer could just make it easier for the employee to withstand those issues until they can't anymore. And then a second late stage retention strategy is a longer resignation bonus. And this really isn't a retention strategy since the employee is going to leave anyway. But depending upon the caliber of the employee and the position that they're leaving, you may want to reward them or pay them to give you a longer resignation period. If you can convince them to stay 4 weeks instead of the standard 2, then that could give you enough time to prepare for their departure and get a head start on finding their replacement. So that brings us to our next polling question, and the question is, which of the following is not a benefit of being known as an employer of choice? And the options are A, hiring top candidates in the market is easier. B, when employees do leave for whatever reason, it will be easier to promote from within. C, you don't have to be proactive or make an investment of time or energy to successfully recruit and hire. And then D, you'll experience increased productivity and profitability across the board. So we'll give you a minute to cast your vote.
And that poll question is live for everyone. Hopefully I have all the right answers loaded in there for you. All right, I'm going to give you just a couple more seconds to go ahead and get those votes in. You got 3, 2, 1, and we're going to go ahead and close and share those results. So which of the following is not a benefit of being known as an employer of choice? 0% said hiring top candidates in the marketplace is easier. 13% said it will be easier to promote from within. 81% said do not have to be proactive in successfully recruiting and hiring. And 6% said increased productivity and profitability across the board.
Well, the answer is C. So no matter how positively you're viewed in this job market, you still have to be proactive and engage candidates. So it sounds like the majority of you voted for C. So thank you for everyone who voted. And as difficult as both hiring and retention are right now, there is something that can help an organization enjoy more success with both. And that's if the organization positions itself as an employer of choice. An employer of choice is an employer that offers a great workplace environment and company culture, and there are a number of benefits associated with being known as an employer of choice. Because hiring the top candidates in the marketplace is easier, retaining your best employees is easier. When employees do leave you, it will be easier to promote from within instead of hiring from outside. And then you have an advantage over your competition, including when it comes to recruiting and hiring top talent. And you'll have increased productivity and profitability across the board. So being known as an employer of choice leads to better hiring and more effective retention. So let's talk about how you can become an employer of choice and what the common characteristics look like for an employer of choice. So in terms of becoming an employer of choice, the first thing that you should do as an organization is to assess a number of benchmarks, including hiring success, turnover rate, and overall employee satisfaction. And ask yourself the following questions. Have all of the candidates that you've extended an offer to in the past 3 years accepted the offer? If they haven't, what's the percentage that turned the offer down? How many employees have quit working at your organization to pursue another opportunity during the past 3 years? And what are the reasons that those people left? Do you know? Do you do exit surveys with them? And if you don't, I recommend exit surveys. And then how do top candidates currently view your organization in the marketplace? And then how are candidates treated during the interview process? And how do you want your organization to be viewed? And the answers to these questions will help you assess how much of an employer of choice your organization is. Being the employer of choice revolves around giving candidates what they want. So you first have to know, what do candidates want? And there are two types of criteria for becoming an employer of choice, both the tangible and the intangible. And the tangible criteria involves everything that the employee does regarding their job, so their duties and responsibilities and the actual work that they do on a daily basis. And the intangible criteria is about company culture, the way that the employee interacts with their coworkers and their boss and other people in the company. And so to be considered a top employer by candidates, companies must offer challenging, forward-thinking work, because people want to work for companies that are leaders and that are doing good work. So employers must also offer opportunities for training, development, and advancement, because people want to work for a company that invests in them by helping them to acquire new skills so that they can stay at the top of their field. And people want to work for a company that has a clearly defined career path, and people are more likely to stay if they see an opportunity for personal growth and a career path going forward. So in terms of the intangible attributes, people are seeking a position that they consider to be personally satisfying and professionally meaningful. And so what does that mean? Well, personally satisfying encompasses things including the relationship that the employee has with their manager, the relationship that the employee has with their coworkers, and the sense of the accomplishments that they enjoy as a result of their jobs. They want to feel that they're having a sense of accomplishment. And then the recognition they feel from the company, their boss, and from the coworkers for the work that they're doing, and positive feelings they have due to the fact that they know that they're pursuing their passions. And then professionally meaningful encompasses things including whether or not the company's core values are in line with their own core values, and whether or not the company is socially conscious and gives back to the community, and whether or not the company stands for something more than just making money, and then whether or not the candidate or employee can envision staying at the company long term. And so you can also assess how much of an employer of choice your organization is by looking at the common characteristics of one. So according to balancecareers.com, there are 12 common characteristics of an employer of choice, and they all revolve around what these companies give to their employees, which include competitive salary and benefits, compelling mission statement and vision, job security, empowerment and authority, access to information, commitment, involvement, positive relationships with coworkers, better work-life balance, a performance culture, fairness, and recognition. And in the veterinary space specifically, I'll also add continuing education, because that's something that's very important in this space. So the list that we just went through was what makes an employer of choice. So let's address the other end of the spectrum, the top reasons why a company or veterinary practice is not considered an employer of choice. And I know these because I speak with professionals on a daily basis, and this is a list of the top reasons that candidates have given to me personally for why an organization is not an employer of choice. So poor reputation in the marketplace, the compensation or the benefits are not competitive, they're unorganized, they don't have good systems in place, or how they were treated during the hiring process, lack of technology, for example, in a veterinary practice, no electronic medical records, or lack of mentorship opportunities. And this is very important for new graduates. A lack of continuing education or chance to learn new skills, or lack of growth opportunities. So if you're considered an employer of choice, more candidates will want to work for you, and then the people that you already have employed will want to stay with you. And so that's a win-win situation for everyone. And then the last word on the retention of employees is that what you focus on as an organization is what you can improve. So think about how much time, energy, and money your organization spends on recruiting and hiring, and then think about how much time, energy, and money that you're spending on the retention of your current employees. Would you say that it's about even between the two? And if I had to guess, I'd say probably not, because the average organization spends more on recruiting and hiring as opposed to efforts on retaining the employees that they do have. So employers might have been able to get away with that in the past, especially during downtimes like the Great Recession, but not today. So the past couple years have shown organizations how deficient their retention strategies are, and some organizations really didn't have any retention strategy in the first place. So there is a 3-step process you can use to retain more of your employees, and this is based on everything I've presented today. So one is to recognize that your organization needs a formalized retention strategy. So this is not just a nice to have, but it's a very necessary need to have one. And then 2, commit to spending at least as much time and energy and effort retaining your current employees as you do hiring new ones. And then 3, use the tips and techniques in this presentation to help create your organization's retention strategy. Because if you don't pay enough attention to retention, then it's going to be really difficult to increase retention rates of your employees, and then that's going to put even more stress on your recruiting and hiring efforts. So I'm going to close today with a case study that shows how difficult it can be both to recruit and retain veterinarians in this job market. So the candidate in this story was a recent graduate. He was just 2 years out of school, and he was earning $84,000 in salary, and he said he felt very stagnant in his job and that there were no opportunities there for him to learn new skills because he felt like he had learned everything there, and he wasn't real excited about going to work every day. So he was talking with the recruiter in our firm about exploring the job market to see what else was out there. And one of our clients became very interested in him, and he went through the interview process. So our client offered him a job with a base salary of $150,000 and a sign-on bonus of $50,000, and that was a 79% increase in his base pay alone. And when you consider the bonus, the total was $116,000 in additional compensation to accept our client's offer. And he was not even looking for $150,000. He would have been happy with $100,000. And so we did not give our client a number that he was expecting to earn, and he did not ask for $150,000, but our client offered him $150,000. So he went back to his current employer to let them know that he was accepting another offer. And then, as to be expected, his current employer made him a counteroffer. So his current employer offered to raise his base pay to $140,000 and give him a $40,000 retention bonus. And this was $20,000 less than what our client was offering him to move to their company. So then his current employer said that if he decided to leave, they were going to have to lay everyone off and close the veterinary clinic, because this was a 3-doctor practice. 2 doctors had left, and he was the only doctor left. So they said if he quit, they were going to have to lay off everybody in the clinic. So our client said they would hire everyone else from the clinic if he accepted the offer, and then he could have his choice of where he wanted to work, because our client had several clinics in the area. So our client was all in with this candidate. Well, then one of his in-laws said that staying at his current employer was a less risky move. They said the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. So despite the fact it involved less money, he decided to accept a counteroffer and stay in a job that he said was stagnant, unfulfilling, and not challenging enough. And so this story illustrates just how difficult it is to close and hire veterinarians in this market. You can make them your best offer, and then their current employer can make them a counteroffer and entice them to stay. And so, in fact, some candidates are interviewing just to try to get an offer to take back to their current employer so they can get a counteroffer or a pay raise because their employer knew they were out interviewing. So you can see the different ways that veterinarians, some are using the leverage they have in the market. And so while some of them are genuinely exploring the job market, some are using offers to get counteroffers or a raise from their current employer. And then others, as I mentioned earlier, are using sign-on bonuses to pay off their student debt to leave the profession altogether. So the story illustrates why it's difficult to recruit, hire, and retain veterinarians right now, and why it's so important for your organization to do everything that you can to improve your efforts and your rate of success in both areas with hiring and retention. So that concludes my presentation. I put my contact information up here on the screen. I also have a newsletter if you want different career tips or hiring strategies that we send out once a month. And I'm also on the social media platforms like LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with me on any of these platforms. So again, I would like to thank the United Spay Alliance for inviting me to be here this evening with all of you.
Incredible information. Just so much information. Stacy, I want to thank you so much for this session. And I see a couple questions out there. I have some questions. The timeline of 2 to 4 weeks for hiring just seems so fast when you're talking about a veterinarian, and they're so critical in our organization. I don't know if you're looking.
We see some that are faster than that, and we see some that are longer, but I would say that is about the standard. Believe it or not, we have had candidates get hired within 24 hours is the fastest that we've seen. I sent a candidate's resume on a Thursday. They were hired on a Friday, and then they resigned the following Monday. So because of I mentioned a candidate that had 50 different organizations trying to recruit this person. And here's what's happening too. I mean, we'll have a candidate that's really excited about a position with one of our client, and they're moving forward in that process, and then we'll talk to them the very next day, and they'll say, well, I just got a call from another recruiter, another organization offering me this other opportunity, so now I have to interview over there. So just the longer that you wait, the more risk that somebody else could be trying to hire that person. So yes, I'd say about 2 to 4 weeks is about standard, but we certainly see faster, and we also see slower processes too.
Do you normally see a scenario that, well, just one scenario that I have experience with is like there's like a Zoom call, then there is like a in person, or like like a day in the clinic, or where you get to meet various people and actually participate and like do a day at the clinic just to see if it's a good fit. Do they do a day in the life, or I mean, how do you decide whether this is the place for you?
They typically do, and I highly recommend that they do a day in the clinic to make sure it's a good fit for everyone, and so you can assess their skills as well. So that is the most common approach. So usually they'll have a phone interview or a video interview, and then they'll have an in-person interview, and then they'll have a day at the clinic. And sometimes those two interviews can be combined. They could bypass a phone interview, jump onto a video interview, and do the in-person interview and the day at the clinic. That could be a combined part of the process. But I highly recommend they spend a day at the clinic to make sure it's a good fit.
So we have a question here about the whole concept of being a nonprofit clinic, and how do we position ourselves in a way that's still attractive to veterinarians? Are we just still beholden to try and figure out our business model in such a way, to balance the dollars versus dollars? Or is there something we can do within our culture, within our organization, that, like you said in the scenario, that person, that veterinarian, was willing to take a little bit lower pay because they knew the environment better? So as being a nonprofit spay neuter clinic, would you have any ideas of, sort of how do we compete against the others?
Yes, I would say that it goes back to what you said, your why. Um, why would they want to be there? And not everybody's motivated by money. So I always say you have to kind of find your tribe. You have to find those people that are going to be the right fit with your organization. And there are some people that, like probably most everybody here today, they want to work for the nonprofit organization. They don't want to work for, because it's very mission driven. And so you've got to find those right people that your mission resonates, what you're doing on a daily basis resonates with them, and that's what they want to do. So, somebody, if you're a nonprofit and the person's, their number one priority is to make money, and you're not able to offer them the most money, that person's probably not going to be the right fit for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What is the average lifespan of a veterinarian in a practice?
Oh my goodness. I'm having to think about that. I don't know if I have any data at my fingertips to answer that question. When I mentioned that I had spoken at one of the vet schools and I mentioned the percentage of their graduates who had already left within a year. I mean, it's becoming, like I said earlier, job hopping is not a stigma anymore. And so, we see a lot of cases where people will sign a year agreement and then a year later, after that year, they go looking, for something else. But I don't know that I have any data at my fingertips on the average lifespan.
Hmm.
But
So,
I will know that the next time we talk.
so if we're looking at a candidate for our clinics, should I be concerned if they're only spending a year at a clinic over the last, like, they've gone to 3 different clinics and they spend 12 months? I mean, is it worth my time to hire somebody who's only, got an average of a 12-month stay?
I would say that depends on the situation. There may be times where it might be your only option because you need somebody, and that's the option that you have. Or if you're in a situation where you're not as needy, you might be able to take more time to find somebody who has not changed jobs as often. But when I first got started in executive search and recruiting, I would have clients that would say, don't send me anybody that's had, more than 3 jobs in like 10 years. And now, we get so many resumes where, I mean, we get resumes where people have had 3 jobs in the same year. In fact, one of our clients has had 3 directors of talent acquisition in their company in a 12-month period. They've had that job turn over 3 times in 12 months. So just across the board, not just in the veterinary space, but in talking with recruiters and other professions, it's becoming very common with some of these younger generations just to change jobs often.
For those of us who aren't familiar with how the recruitment structure works, how is your team compensated?
So we have a couple different ways. We work both on a contingency basis and also on a retained basis. So typically our higher level, like right now I'm looking for a president for an animal health company, and that's a retained search where they pay a third of the fee up front. They pay a third of the fee in the middle of the process when we're scheduling the face-to-face interviews, and then they pay the third part of the fee when the person is hired. So the retained search is a lot more common with the higher level executive positions. And then for placing veterinarians, we'll do both, but most of our, depending on what the client prefers, but most of our positions for veterinarians in clinical practice setting are on a contingency basis, where the client doesn't pay anything until the position is filled. So that way, it's more of a shared risk where we're investing our resources up front, and then if for whatever reason we can't find somebody, the client's not out any money. Some firms will charge the client up front, and then if they don't find anybody, then the client is still pay that investment. We prefer in the clinical practice side to do as much on the contingency side as possible because we don't want the client to pay unless we are able to find somebody that's a good fit.
Hmm. Yep. So we have a veterinarian out in the audience who's been 47 years in practice. And then we have another person reporting in 2 years on average is the length of stay with veterinarians at their clinic. So be honest, Stacy, have you ever had any veterinarians ask you about opportunities doing low cost, high volume spay neuter?
Yes.
So doing a specifically targeted search, or how do we promote that? How do we get that out there? Sort of how do you help us find the high volume, high quality spay neuter veterinarians and the opportunities? Is there a way to sort us out and have us in a sort of a different category or a different place, so that I find the waters are very muddy out there? I find it seems like it's very hard for people to find their way and their direction. And is there a way for us to pull ourselves out and specialize in this high volume, high quality spay neuter space?
So I have certainly placed veterinarians in high volume spay and neuter clinics, and oftentimes when I do, that's where they've come from before. That's something they've done. Sometimes maybe they left that and they went into general practice, and then they wanted to go back to that. So we've certainly placed those veterinarians. We try to, within our database, to segment veterinarians into areas of the profession. So ER, urgent care, specialty, nonprofits, spay and neuter. However, people they change from one area to another sometimes. So you might have an ER vet that decides to do urgent care. You might have a GP that decides to do ER, or you might have somebody become a specialist, or you might have somebody that worked for a nonprofit that went to GP, or went to GP that went to a nonprofit. So we do try to do that, but then we try not to limit it that as well. So if we have a search in a certain area, like for example, we're recruiting for an ER practice, we don't just call ER veterinarians. We'll also talk to the general practices to say, do you want to do ER? Because sometimes people change their mind and decide they want to get into another area.
Right. Yep. So one of our attendees says here, Tennessee has openings for vets and spay neuter clinics if you know anybody. And one other story I heard a couple days ago was a dairy or a farm animal veterinarian is now spaying and neutering cats because the demand and the needs are just so high in Northern California, where there's just no spay neuter going on for cats up there, or very limited. And so actually the agricultural veterinarians are on the side, or 2 days a week when they're not going out and dealing with the farm animals, they're starting to do some spays and neuters of cats and trying to think
I had a
creatively.
veterinarian like that I placed. He was a large animal veterinarian, and he got a little bit older, and the physical demands of working with large animals became too much. So he decided to transition, and now he's spaying and neutering small animals.
Yeah, so that might be a trend. And we've also heard, retirees. We will all be hearing from Dr. Whedon during the conference this weekend, and he retired to Florida planning on playing golf. He's been there probably for 4 years, and he hasn't played a round of golf yet. And he's been too busy spaying and neutering cats. And so there is talk about accessing volunteer and retired veterinarians to do a day a week or a couple of days a week and make some extra money. How do we find retired veterinarians?
Well, sometimes people have these visions of what retirement's going to look like, and then they get there, and it's not what they expected. They get bored. And a lot of times, as people contact me, they'll say, I've been retired for a year, a couple years, and I'd like to get back to work. And sometimes it's full time, sometimes it's part time. So I think just networking, asking your employees who they know, or here's the question I like to ask people. I'll say, who's the best doctor you used to work with at ABC company? So not just asking them, who do you know right now, but who did you work with over there that you really enjoyed working with? So just, working your network and asking your employees, do you know any veterinarians that have retired that might want to come back, and just calling them and saying, would you like to come back, or even, part-time?
Excellent. Oh, I saw one more question I think popping up here. Says there is a need on reservations for veterinary care, and it's very rewarding to give back. So yes, um, yep, I think there's a lot of specialty programs that go there. Livestock are mainly livestock vets do dogs and cats too. They're wonderful in this rural area for vets now. They still have to wait a while for surgery appointments, but the livestock vets are doing dogs and cats also now. So it seems like we're having to be creative and thinking through things and really looking at different options and opportunities. Stacy, this was tremendous, absolutely tremendous. I really appreciate you. Your presentation is fantastic. Everybody, her contact information is right there on the slide. These slides are part of the handout. And so if you want to have further questions with Stacy, it's right there. You have a team, right? You have a team working for you, don't you, at the Vet Recruiter?
Yes, yeah, we have a team, and Stacey, thank you so much again for inviting me. And I love the fact that both of our names are Stacy, and we both spell them the right way.
Yes, I know. It's actually this week I have met well, you and I met another Stacy this week. So it seems to be the week of Stacy's. I usually don't run into it. She spelled it the correct way too. So and that was a veterinarian Stacy. So I should introduce you to her. But she was fantastic. So Stacy, thank you so much. The Vet Recruiter, we're really kicking off this conference with the heaviest topic out there, the most popular topic out there for sure too.